There was always rumblings behind the scenes, but we believed that we could carry on. We believed that we had a future. We went about and we started building a house, and we got certificate of no present interest from the government regarding the farm, so we thought we would be okay. But things turned out a bit different.
I just wonder, as a young man as you were, whether you looked around you at that particular time, knowing that Mugabe was in power, knowing his overall sort of philosophy of Africa and African politics, whether you thought to yourself, in the long run, maybe this isn't sustainable for white farmers like me to be sitting on land, you know, thousands of hectares, making plenty of money, having a good life, when so many people around me, black Zimbabweans, are living in poverty.
Well, we were very involved in trying to help in our community around us. You know, we had various competitions that we were running amongst the black farmers on neighboring farms in the small-scale commercial area, where we were trying to teach them some of the skills that we had. We had black commercial farmers as well next door, and we were involved with trying to build a multicultural society where we'd all be able to go forward together. Our black farm workers, obviously, we were trying to uplift them at the same time.
But there was a structural problem, wasn't there? I mean, if you just look at the figures, I just looked at them earlier today. I mean, white farmers at that time owned, I think, 78% of the grade 1 and grade 2 land. At least that was the story in 1980, and according to the figures I've seen, it hadn't changed that much by the year 2000. And in terms of what most black labourers and farmers on the land owned, it was just a matter of a few hectares on communal poor land. So there was a basic and fundamental inequality there.
Yeah, we had 18% of the total land in the country by 2000.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the quality land.
The quality land is, I think, a little bit of a misnomer. We, in fact, had invasions and people leaving our land saying that our land was rubbish, because the whole propaganda machine made it out to make us out to be the people that owned all the best land. That wasn't true at all. We had 18% of the total land area in the country, and people in whatever natural region were able to do very well, providing they had title deeds and were able to develop that land, so the irrigation potential was able to work for them. 3.6 million hectares was actually bought by government on a willing seller, willing buyer basis.
Yeah.
And that's how it should have carried on.
Well, you're right that there was some transference of land, but nothing like what Mugabe wanted to see. I just wonder, you know, when we get to talk about what Mugabe decided to do in the year 2000 with the very proactive and aggressive redistribution campaign, whether, as that began, you were aware of a fundamental problem or not. You just didn't see there was a problem.
I didn't see there was a problem because there was always land available for the government to purchase if it so wanted. The British government was also putting in money for that program, and if it was done in a proper manner, it was gradually all changing hands. You know, we went from 30% in 1980 to 18% in the year 2000. So it was happening on a willing seller, willing buyer basis.
It is the question of the speed, isn't it? Because Mugabe looked around, he said, here we are in 2000, and I haven't delivered on something that is so fundamentally dear to my heart. That is delivering the land of my country to black Zimbabweans, changing fundamentally the structure of ownership in the country. So what he decided to do was go in a very aggressive way, using, frankly, fear and intimidation to get white farmers off the land, and using laws that were passed by his parliament to ensure that it had the veneer of legality about it. Now, how did you resist that?
Well, I think before I go into that, if I could just put you straight on the issue of the invasions being about redistributing land. I think in 2000, it has to be told that in 2000, in February, there was a constitutional referendum for a new constitution, which Mugabe lost. He knew that parliamentary elections were in 4 months' time, and he had to move in very quickly to ensure that the farm workers on all our farms were intimidated and living in a condition of fear so that he didn't lose the June parliamentary election. So within 2 weeks of that referendum result, the war veterans came onto the farms and beat up our farm workers, beat us up, made sure that no opposition politics could get to that constituency within the country, which was the swing vote.
Yeah, he wanted the white farmers off the land, and frankly, he wanted many of them out of the country.
Absolutely, he did.
And he was prepared to see, you call them the war veterans, bunches of men, some young, some not so young, go onto the white farmers' land and intimidate, and there was violence, there were murders, and I just wonder why you were so adamant from the beginning that you would resist when so many white farmers decided it wasn't worth the candle.
Well, I think I remember going to a meeting about a week after the first invasion started, and the centenary farmers said, if we have another week of this, then there's no way that we will be able to carry on. And 11 years later, still a few people are out there. We tried very hard to stay, and I don't blame anyone who wasn't able, under the circumstances that they particularly faced in their particular situation on their farm, weren't able to weather it.
Is that entirely true? I mean, I've read the book you've written about this, and you say you don't blame anybody who couldn't take it and walked away, but you sort of do blame some of them. You've accused some in the Farmers' Union, for example, where you were a very active member, but also an official for many years. You say some of the leadership were guilty, frankly, of collaboration.
Well, there was intense fear, and a lot of people did a lot of things which I don't agree with. Some of them, as a result of those deals that they made, you know, may not have faced the kind of situations that I don't blame the others for leaving as a result of. But
you felt, did you, that they were betraying an ideal, a notion of the kind of Zimbabwe you wanted to live in?
Well, we had a total breakdown of the rule of law. We had a total breakdown of property rights, of protection of people who were getting beaten up and that sort of thing. And I believed very strongly that where you have a breakdown of the rule of law, you have to fight it with the law. And you cannot just abandon the law, abandon people to their fates. And certainly,
but the law isn't going to help you.
Did happen in certain circumstances.
The law isn't going to help you when you've got a bunch of armed men surrounding your farmstead and when they are threatening to come into your house and kill you. I mean, you can try and call the police, but as your own experience tells you, the police aren't necessarily going to respond. At that point, it seems to me, raising a young family, the logical choice for the safety of your children, if nothing else, would have been to get out.
Well, you go back to Gukurahundi in the early 80s when 20,000 civilians were murdered and no one knew about it. Everyone hunkered down and everyone decided we can't go to the law, we can't go to the press, we can't do anything about it. Better not even talk about it, better allow all these civilians to get murdered. I believe very strongly that that was wrong, and it allowed many thousands more people to get murdered as a result. And I believe that the stand that we took in trying to make sure that the wrongs were publicized, that the wrongs were taken to court, that there was some form of accountability tried to be put in place has actually saved a lot of people from a lot worse.
I just wonder how deep a personal dilemma it was. I was very struck by the letter you wrote to your own 4-year-old son, Joshua, at the height of the violence. I think it was in 2002. You wrote him this very long letter, which, of course, you believed he would read later in life and make sense of his own history. But the point of it was really summed up in these words. You said, unlike others who are leaving for the sake of the children, we are staying precisely for the sake of you and your siblings, for the children. Mm-hmm. Try and make sense. Explain that to me.
Well, I believe that where good men do nothing, then evil will prevail, and the next generation will live under this cloud of evil which will destroy their lives. I believe that Zimbabwe is a wonderful country and it's got a wonderful people and it's got a wonderful future if we, as the generation that are able to make a difference, are there making a difference for our children.
But isn't it ironic that as I look at Zimbabwe today and the position of the few, very few white farmers who remain, a couple of hundred or so of them, it seems to me the ones who do remain are mostly the ones who found a way of doing deals with the regime, with Mugabe. They either went into partnership with senior ZANU-PF people, or they agreed to share their land and perhaps donate some of the profits to black farmers who worked alongside them. But they did the deals, and you always refused to, and I just wonder whether you regret that now.
No, I don't regret that at all, because a lot of people that try to do deals, they also came very short as well. There was no... There was nothing that could save anyone, really, at the end of the day. There are a few people that are still out there at the moment. But as Winston Churchill said, the definition of appeasement is the one who feeds the crocodile and hopes he will be the last to be eaten. I don't believe in feeding crocodiles.
I want to talk to you about your faith, because you've made a film about your experience, you've written a book about your experience, and what comes through so strongly is your profound Christian faith. But it seems to me it works in a very striking way, because you were, after all, born in England. You're not a native-born Zimbabwean. It seems to me you have a view of your presence in Zimbabwe which is actually quite close to being that of a missionary. Would I be right?
Well, I suppose as Christians, we all have a mission here on earth, wherever we might find ourselves. And yeah, perhaps there is a certain element of that. We have to be the salt and the light, Jesus says, in the societies that we live in.
Yeah, but I suppose what I'm getting at is there's a traditional view of how missionaries went to Africa, maybe in the 19th century, and viewed Africa as a place to civilize, you know, sort of a place of savage beliefs which had to be brought to civilization. I just wonder, you know, when you talk about the spirits of the underworld, malevolent spirits of the underworld at play in Zimbabwe, and you talk about the witch doctors. You claim at one point even that, you know, human sacrifice has been a tradition, a history in Zimbabwe. Whether you're not in danger of sounding like, you know, a white man who's determined to civilize an uncivilized country.
Well, I think where there are things that are wrong, then whoever we are, we have to do whatever it is that it takes to put those things
in the
right.
way you depict...
For example, I talk in the book at one stage of having a dinner with Mugabe. And the chap that I was sitting next to was a man who had a human head in the boot of his car. That kind of thing cannot be right, whatever society you live in, whatever your belief system is.
No, but
and as a Christian, I think one has to point out that the battle that is going on is not just a battle that's in the physical. There's a spiritual battle that is also taking place between good and evil, not only in Zimbabwe, but in different places all over the world. And we very often, in our physical, human, rationalistic selves, discount the spiritual aspect to the battle that is being fought.
But the danger, is it not, is that some Zimbabweans, looking at the way you analyse your situation in their country, conclude that you believe that there's something fundamentally uncivilized about a Zimbabwe which doesn't buy into your notion of Christianity, for example, and can that really be right? I mean, can your portrayal of Mugabe, for example, as a crocodile, which the image you repeatedly use, and other bestial imagery that comes through in your analysis of your enemies in Zimbabwe, is that really sort of helpful or right?
Well, I think it's important. The West has poured in hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 50 years into Africa. To what purpose? Because they don't understand how to really help the people of Africa. They don't understand what the battle is, what it is that's holding the people back in poverty.
Do you think you really understand Zimbabweans?
I don't understand fully. I cannot hope to understand all the spiritual aspects. No one can. But we are, as white people in Zimbabwe, we're not foreigners. My father-in-law's family has been on the continent for 300 years. And there is, I believe, a lot of understanding of the continent that they live on through all those generations of living and working and trying to make a success in the continent that they are living on. And that wisdom, I believe, is something that has been passed on to many of us who are also living in Zimbabwe at this time.
And your faith, your belief in the righteousness of what you were doing led you to this very long legal confrontation with Mugabe and his regime. Now, it took you in the end all the way to the regional tribunal, the SADC, the Southern Africa Development Community Tribunal, that was recently set up and which was supposed to be a new sort of rights court for all of Southern Africa. Did you do that because you believed that ultimately you could find a legal avenue that would allow you to trump Mugabe's ambitions? Did you think this would work? The
holy grail, I think, of the problems in Africa is the African solution to the African problem. And for us, the SADC Tribunal came up at a time when we had just had our hearing in the Supreme Court. We knew that we weren't going to get a sympathetic hearing, that we weren't going to get a sympathetic judgment. And within a week of the Supreme Court hearing, the SADC Tribunal, which had been envisaged in 1992, was open for business. And we decided that we must take our case to the SADC Tribunal, an African court, to look at this problem of whether a white person could be an African ultimately, whether a white person should be able to have access to
have the
same
law rights
in Zimbabwe.
The same inalienable
and to have the
rights.
same rights as every other SADC citizen.
Indeed. And here's the bittersweet thing. You won a historic judgment in the SADC Tribunal, but in the course of which you also suffered, as a family, the most brutal attack, which left you very badly injured, but left your father-in-law, more particularly, injured to a point where he never properly recovered.
Indeed. 2 weeks before the main hearing, actually, on the very day that President Mugabe was being sworn back into power after that bloody election in 2008, we were abducted, we were taken off, we were beaten extremely badly, we had many broken bones between us, and my mother-in-law was made to sign a bit of paper because my father-in-law and myself were both unconscious at the time, to say that we would withdraw from the tribunal. That was 2 weeks before the main hearing. But somehow I managed to get to the hearing. My father-in-law unfortunately didn't. He was still in hospital. And as you say, he later died of those injuries that were incurred.
I mean, I've seen the pictures. I can't believe you're sitting here before me now. Admittedly, it's 3 years on, but your face was so badly battered then that I don't see visible scars, but the wounds were very real. And you described sitting in the back of a pickup. Well, you weren't sitting. You were lying in the back of a pickup truck. Your feet and hands were bound. Your mother-in-law and your father-in-law were groaning next to you, all of you bloodied and battered, and you believed you were going to die.
Indeed.
And at that point, did you think, Ben, I've pushed this too far?
No, I didn't. Funnily enough, while I was lying on the ground, I remember saying to God, if it's my time, I said, I'm ready. But if you've still got things for me to do down here, then I'm also ready. And very shortly after that, the verse that I've always found most difficult that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, which is, love your enemies and bless those who persecute you, came into my heart. It was almost something that physical had happened. And I reached out. I was all bound very tightly. I had a badly fractured skull. I had lots of broken ribs and things like that. And I reached out to the people that were all surrounding me in the darkness, and I said, may the Lord Jesus bless you. And I actually touched their feet. And I had this supernatural love for these people that were doing this terrible thing to us, which resulted
Even though in the course of this conversation we've established that you believe there is an evil in the people who did this to you.
Yes, but there's a very different thing between loving the evil and loving the person. Jesus says, love your enemies. And it's an impossible thing to do, I believe, in the natural. It has to be something supernatural. And I was blessed with the grace to be able to find love for these people that were doing this terrible thing to us.
I used the word bittersweet because you won that legal victory in the end, but it hasn't done you any good. You sit before me today as a man who has lost the family land. You've been driven out of your home with your family. Most white farmers have given up the ghost. Many have left the country altogether. Do you feel like you lost?
I don't. Not at all. Yes, we have lost in terms of losing our material possessions, losing our home, losing our crops, losing everything on the farm, everything that we've ever worked for in a material sense. But I do not feel that I've lost inside me. I have got a hope for the future, which I think is perhaps a supernatural hope. It's not something that is necessarily a reasonable hope, but I have hope within my heart.
You fought for the right to be seen as a white African with inalienable rights, the same as black Africans. Do you believe you've won that argument?
I believe that it's a battle in process, and I believe that we've still got some way to go. But I believe that the future will show us to be just as black Americans are now considered Americans, just as white Americans are also considered as Americans. We as white Africans will also eventually be considered to be Africans in the same way as black people, but the battle is still going on.
Ben Freeth, we have to end there. Thanks very much for being on Hard Talk.